Hello and welcome back to the Else Realm Diner. I am joined by the wonderful Paul Harrison. Hello, Paul.
Howdy.
Good morning. And we have challenged ourselves to try and talk about a film that came out last October that I've been wanting to talk about ever since. And also a bit of news that came to both of our attention this week in the space of around half an hour. Now, we're both verbose and a little bit waffly at times, but let's see how we go.
Hey, that's a half truth.
We can okay. Gift of the gab. Gift of the gab. There you go.
Yeah, I like
Gift
that.
of the
I
gab.
dig that.
That's better.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Okay. So half an hour, and let's try and keep it to about 15 minutes ish each, or maybe 2010. So first of all,
Yep.
Joker movie. Joker movie. Um, Going into it, when I first saw, well, first of all, I'm quite impressed with how quick the production was on that film. It
Mm,
seemed as though 1 minute they were showing test footage and we were getting photographs from on set, and you saw
yep.
interesting hints of artwork and stuff were hinting at stuff from, for example, The Killing Joke, etc. And then before you know it, the film is out, and then before you know it, Joaquin Phoenix has won an Oscar,
Yep.
and so that's the first thing is it was a very quick turnaround,
Yep.
but. I suppose I just wanted just to kick off our little conversation just by saying, is this is this the Gotham movie that you and I wanted to see? Because I remember not that long ago, I say not that long ago, sometime last year maybe, we were talking about how we wanted to see a film that was about the effect that Gotham as a city has on its citizens. And what's interesting is that there are, for example, there are YouTube videos out there where people sort of talk about why it is that someone would continue to live in Gotham. There's a
Mm,
certain amount of self denial. You said, oh no,
yeah.
say denial that one lives with. Where you just go, oh, that wouldn't happen to me. Joker's
Yeah.
nerve toxin isn't going to get me, or I'm not going to get kidnapped by the Penguin. So there's that element of that. Putting that to one side, the question of why on earth would you keep living there? Does this film for you, or did that film for you, satisfy an element of this crushing, weight of living in Gotham City in the late 70s, early 80s?
I think that's a really good question because at the outset, I didn't see the need or really understand the purpose of a Joker movie coming off the back of the DCEU.
Hmm.
So, like, putting that back in that context, I was thinking, well, is this is this an admission of defeat? I guess was my
Mm.
first question. That they're going in this direction rather than pressing forward with those Marvel-esque plans.
Hmm.
Moving swiftly on from that point, you're absolutely right. I think to identify that that is the purpose that that film fills.
Hmm.
That is the question it seems to address to a large extent. And on that side of it, I think it did a really good job. Um, Not that I really enjoyed the film. Now that was the interesting thing. Like I wasn't looking forward to the film.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't convinced we needed the film.
Uh-huh.
But by the time the film was there, I mean, I went to see it with my partner, and we kind of went in there, and she loved the film and enjoyed the process of it, but she likes much more harrowing material than I. I realized two-thirds through that movie, or rather two acts into that movie, I
Uh-huh.
wasn't enjoying it at all,
Right. Interesting.
even though I thought it was excellently executed in a
Uh-huh.
number of ways.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, so on that point, I think it did the job absolutely, but I have other thoughts
Well,
about how it did that job.
and I suppose for me, mechanically, and I've hinted at this in a reaction video I did about the film. Mechanically, I think the film achieved this through a couple of means. I think first of all, uh, it was filmed from a very much a bottom up
Mm,
perspective, lots of ground shot, looking up at buildings. There's no superhero on top of a building in this.
yeah,
It's all crushing down on you. It's in the trailer where you have the Joker running along through a tunnel, and again, it's from the ground, and also the city rises up like canyons on either side of you in the
yeah.
streets. I thought that was quite cool, and also I liked the fact that not only was there was a sort of a mechanical kind of, as I say, a cinematographic. Is that a
Cinematographic?
cinematographic tool being used to emphasize that, but also in terms of the narrative, I thought actually and it reminded me again of 80s Batman comic books. There's lots of use of the news in the background, TV
Mm,
shows and radio that's
mhm.
in the Dark Knight Returns, for example, has this
Frank
as well.
Millerisms, yeah.
Yeah, where you have and actually I thought actually lots of stuff on the TV looked like something Frank Miller would have put in the background of a comic strip, actually. But
Mm,
it was emphasizing this sense of society papering over the cracks.
yeah.
There's rubbish piling up in the streets. There's talk of mutant rats. There's all this sort of stuff. But also at the same time, you have your man on doing his nightly New York style show from
Uh-huh.
a theatre on the equivalent of Broadway. Um,
Yeah.
and was it bread and circuses? The idea that in Rome you can distract people from anything as long as you entertain them enough.
Mm,
I thought that was there, and in that sense, I thought that the film set up quite well the desire and the desperate need for change. So people in that city were primed to jump on anything that was going to change their circumstances. Now,
yeah.
eventually, that need will be fulfilled by a vigilante dressed like a bat. But I think initially it was quite reasonable that actually it could be fulfilled by what seems at least like a grassroots protest against wealthy people, especially when they start
Mm,
calling the citizens themselves clowns.
mm.
Um, I thought so. In that sense, I thought the setup was quite good. But I guess in terms of our challenge to keep this brief, um, what did you think then, or what do you think of the use of Arthur Fleck as a character who becomes the Joker? Because that's really at the heart of this, and it's also the reason why obviously Joaquin Phoenix won his Oscar.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not sure necessarily that it was a. I'm not sure it did as much for mental health awareness, for example, as lots of people said it did. I
Yeah.
think actually the film was quite exploitative of someone who has a problem.
I'm so glad
Um,
you said that
oh, okay,
because,
okay.
yeah, because I completely agree. And like, it's a kind of hot button issue,
Hmm.
and it feels like it's saying, hey, society is failing the mentally ill.
Hmm.
And that side of the message, I think, is obviously, not obviously, it should be self-evident that that is often the case, but
Hmm.
it's often the case, um, and is a fair point to make, and describes some of the processes that I'm sure people have actually been through. The interviews, the support networks, kind of lacking funding,
Hmm. Hmm.
the lack of recognition
Hmm.
of something that is causing someone real, despair.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and also the hint that not only is the net not necessarily going to catch you when you fall, but it's
mm,
hinted in this film, but through a quick flashback, that Arthur has already been in an institution
yeah,
once, and now
yeah,
he ends up in one at the end of the movie as well.
yeah.
And the idea that it's either or, either you're functioning in this city or you're just thrown away. It was an unnuanced portrayal of a system, which in many ways it feels so obviously, around me in North Tyneside and north of England, an awful lot of support structure has just been eroded in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, but
10 years. I wonder what also happened in the
what
last
happened 10
10
years
years.
ago? Um,
Can't even.
can't make the connection. But also at the same time, I think it's interesting that uh, to put it another way, I thought Arthur's life was very relatable in some ways.
Yeah.
Feeling as though sometimes things are stacked against you. In my case, for example, living with family members who needed your support. Not that my mum ever needed specifically the type of support that Arthur gives his mother, but having this sense of responsibility for your family
Mm,
in a system and situation where help isn't coming in from elsewhere, I
yeah.
thought was very relatable. But I thought that his response to that scenario was again it was a caricature of
Yeah.
mental health problems,
Yeah.
and I suppose to go to hop skip and jump from what you were just saying to the punchline, as it were, pun intended.
Uh-huh.
Um, it doesn't give him the right to go and shoot someone on a tram.
Hmm. Hmm.
To well to ultimately end up where he ends up. It doesn't I don't think it absolves him, as it were, of his sins, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's it. And
mm,
there's definitely a problem with that progression, and it is with that progression.
mm,
And I feel like it's because the movie is in some senses written backwards.
mm-hmm,
It knows its destination and it's tied to that destination,
mm-hmm,
and it doesn't necessarily do the job it needs to do without becoming quite manipulative.
yeah,
So we see someone who's in a sympathetic situation with and it's this portrayal as well. I mean, yes, there is nuance and people are multifaceted, but the portrayal of both of his parents
mm-hmm,
goes from them being um, essentially quite positive figures.
mm-hmm,
One is positive in a sense that they are this lost ideal that they cannot reattain in his father,
mm-hmm,
and one is the sympathetic figure who needs his care, who he for whom he is responsible.
mm,
And they take those two concepts and they fuck with them. Now, in film, that's quite a normal thing to do,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
to manipulate one's perceptions of and assumptions. Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, However, the way that it's done, I had some problems with. And, you know, so Bruce Wayne's father, Thomas Wayne, who's deified in Bruce Wayne's eyes in most of the depictions that we've seen,
mm-hmm,
is actually kind of a complete asshole.
yeah,
And it turns out that Arthur Fleck's mother was this potentially, manipulative and vindictive and intentionally harmful and abusive character.
mm,
Those things unto themselves are not unrealistic,
no,
obviously. Um, but I felt like the journey between those 2 points, uh, and one example is when I'm in the cinema and Arthur Fleck has finally turned and he decides to shoot the guy that dobbed him in, who was the guy that gave him the gun to begin with,
mm-hmm,
right? This there is an argument to say that this guy, even though he was also a scumbag, but then pretty much everyone in the film is a scumbag, so it's relative. This guy's a scumbag, but he's a scumbag because we're told he's a scumbag at that point. Previous to that point, he was the only person who'd recognized Arthur Fleck as a human being
yeah,
and actually invested in him in any way.
mm,
And then we had the audience laughing and cheering when he kills him. And I,
mm.
I was sat in the cinema kind of like, wow, what the fuck just happened that this audience is baying for this guy's blood
In the flat, yeah,
in the
yeah,
flat
mm-hmm,
and laughing at him terrorizing the dwarf who's just trying to leave.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and you see, now this is the thing that, and because I feel as though, and for people who are watching this, yeah, you may feel as though uh, this isn't this is a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a while. This isn't necessarily a review, or or necessarily even a
no, this ain't
massively
your daddy's Joker review.
yeah, yeah, exactly, or a massively accessible, hey guys, pop figures and Joker. Um, but it is I even though I've started from a place by saying that it is an unhelpful portrayal of a man who has problems. Um,
Mm,
I did find myself laughing at that point where the guy wants to leave and he can't because he can't reach the lock on the door. In the same or in a similar vein to which I laughed at Heath Ledger's "I'm going to make this pencil disappear." Whack,
mm,
ta-da! Um it was shocking, and and as you say, in real terms, how he got from A to B, and actually then just murdering a guy in his flat and being covered in blood. Which also I thought the visual was quite good. The white contrasting with the red on his face was quite powerful. If you
yeah.
think about it, it not only makes no sense, but also uh, it's it's not actually something necessarily that the Joker would do in terms of other characterizations. He does murder people for the sake of it, but often it's for an effect as
Mm,
opposed to because he feels personally aggrieved. He doesn't necessarily,
mm,
often in portrayals of the Joker in the comics, he doesn't necessarily feel, unless it's performatively, "Oh, Harley, what have you done to me?" He
yeah.
doesn't go, "Oh, my ego has been hurt."
Yeah.
As far as
Yeah.
he's concerned, the world is a stage for his sense of humor or for his philosophy. It's not really something that would affect him in that way. So yes, it doesn't feel right, at the same time, I still found that moment kind of amusing. But then also it's capped off with a very serious "You were the only one who was good to me." Kiss on the forehead, off you go. Um, which I mean, yeah, just to fill out this other side of my appreciation for the film is that I did appreciate the transformation that the character has. So when he's in his, off color, very Cesar Romero sort of Joker uh, suit, dancing down the stairs, he's upright. He feels empowered. He feels. Well, actually, what I wrote here was that he has. Uh, yeah, there are. What's it? A transformation and emancipation. He's found a niche for himself
Yeah.
where he doesn't feel that he has to answer to anyone else. And for a character in that way, in that moment, I kind of felt good for him, which is
Mm.
it, which I found interesting. But also, which it seems lots of people did, in so much as I saw middle-aged women saying, "I can identify with this." I saw old men and young people saying, "I can identify with this." And
Yeah.
I suppose people in that sense maybe they're putting onto the film their own life troubles, whether it's the tax man or it's the guy who won't go off your back at work, and the idea of doing what you want to do,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
necessarily even to them, but doing what you want to do. I can
Yeah.
see why people enjoyed that, and in the moments I did, I even wrote here that I smiled. The empowerment made me smile, but I suppose what I found really weird was the just the juxtaposition with Chaplin like lightness. So this
Hmm.
idea of him saying, "Yeah, my mum told me I was put on earth to make people smile," and also the fact that they have a Chaplin movie playing in the cinema, and it very much reflects actually how he Arthur wants the world to be, you know, meeting people and dancing with them, this kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the director describes it as though Arthur has musicality within him, this idea of dance being important to him. Um, the juxtaposition is a little bit sickening, isn't it? And I mean sickening in the same way that being on a high mountain with no safety gear is sickening. It kind of makes you feel a bit sort of, ooh, because so for example, I found it. Something I liked about the film was I liked the way that actually, the more comfortable he is with who he wants to be, the more freely he dances. So,
Mm.
so actually, just after he has murdered the two guys on the tram, the fact that he calms himself through dance in front of the mirror, I actually thought that was quite a good character moment. But I suppose all of
Yeah.
this comes and so very briefly also the music I thought was excellent in this film. I thought the music was very good, but also part of the mechanics here was that the sound was very loud in this mix,
Mm.
very
Mm.
loud. Again, you felt as though you were being crushed by it. But anyway, just
Yeah. And
but
that's
so go on. So
no, I was just going to say that on a technical front, I can't fault the film, the way
no,
that it was shot,
hmm,
or the cinematography, to use the real term, the sound design, the score choices, the music choices,
hmm.
despite some being slightly problematic, not even slightly problematic, really problematic, because one of them was Gary Glitter,
Oh,
um,
yeah, good point.
and the
Yeah,
famous stairwell
yeah,
scene, isn't it?
yeah,
It's a Gary Glitter song.
yeah,
So we know that this film is trying to push your buttons,
yeah,
and it does
yeah.
effectively push a lot of buttons.
Hmm.
There's, I think, a slight friction, and I can't tell if it's like a fruitful tension or if it's an ignorant friction of kind of two concepts. On the one hand, you've got the fight the power, the man is bad, people are being crushed down.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, you have this depiction of everyone in Gotham is a scumbag.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the people are trash.
Hmm.
And for me, those two, if you were to look back at the origins of the kind of the anarchistic model,
Hmm.
those two things don't align very well because people um, in the early work of say Noam Chomsky or someone like that, you see that actually it's faith in people that means you do not have to rely on a dominant parental crushing system
Hmm.
to keep things in check. You don't
Hmm.
need that because it has this belief that, and I'm not advocating this necessarily, it's just philosophically, this is how it works.
Hmm.
It's advocating the idea that people aren't inherently bad and therefore you don't need society on top of them to keep them in check.
No.
What this film seems to do is confuse those two things and
Mm.
say people are inherently bad, and we don't need the system on top of them to keep them in check because we can let chaos rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
As part of the Joker's philosophy, I can
Mm.
see that being the case.
Mm-hmm.
As the what Althusa would describe as the problematic of this film,
Mm-hmm.
before that became a buzz term for things being, wrong. The problematic, the thing between the lines, reading between the lines of this film, I think that's a philosophy they didn't think about or get
No.
right.
No.
They didn't get their position on society really fixed before they started critiquing society. And that has taken me a long time to figure that out, because I came out the cinema going, there was something inherently wrong
Mm.
about that, and I can't put my finger on it. And I think it's that.
Yeah.
It's that it takes these two very opposing notions of what society is and should be, and then just throws both into the mix without giving it any thought or an answer.
Well, and well, I mean, it's interesting because my initial response to that would be, does it need to? Does it need? Is it its responsibility to answer anything? But I suppose actually, when you're dealing with a character like this, it's interesting, or rather, this was an opportunity to at the very least have an answer in the form of a structure, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to actually a a moral, if that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, and the thing is, and maybe it's a good thing that we took a long time to get to this, because actually when I first said let's talk about the Joker movie, you used the phrase juvenile. You said that
Mm-hmm.
there was a juvenile, or it felt as though the movie in some ways was juvenile. And actually hearing you describe what you've just described, I think I better understand what you mean by that. In so much as it feels like, and not that I was ever quite this type of teenager,
Mm.
but it feels like a very teenage response to say simultaneously, I want freedom, but I also want to be able to live at home. I want to be able to rebel, but also give me good grades. You know,
Mm.
and and not having much more of a thought beyond the fact that it's not fair. Essentially,
Mm. Mm.
which ultimately is where, because what I was going to say, well, first of all, actually, a funny little point I wrote down here is this film clearly takes place in a time before CCTV. Because otherwise you would have just been caught. If you did that on a tram today or on a metro
Yeah.
today, you would
Yeah.
just be caught.
Yeah.
Um, but something I was going to say is what. So initially, when I watched this film, and it's interesting. I think I'm talking myself into liking it much less than I thought I did. Interestingly, but I think when I'm watching it,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. I think when one watches this film, it's possible just to get swept up in the effect. You
Yeah.
see what I mean? So I think I can still watch it and go, "Oh yes, this is a dark tunnel I'm going down." Oh, and just enjoy that ride. But looking back on it, one of the things that when I came out of the film, I was thinking, well, did he shoot Bobby De Niro in the face? I think he did. I think he did. I don't think. Some people are saying it's all in his head, in his head, as an unreliable narrator. But I think he
Mm.
did shoot Bobby De Niro. Um, but and initially I was going, oh, brilliant! That echoes Miller again. Perfect, perfect. But actually, I'm wondering. There's something that's niggling at me. So much as what separates that act of violence in front of Gotham's TV audience and also an audience in the room from the act of violence that we see in for example, The Dark Knight Returns. What? Why does it actually feel different after a while?
Mm-hmm.
Because initially I thought, yeah, that's echoing that perfectly, but actually it's not. And I'm not quite sure what it is. I think on the one hand, I suppose in the Dark Knight Returns you have a Joker who's had, as it were, his career, who's been stagnant for a long time, and who appears to be trying to now come back into society. And his carers are sort of saying, "This is a rehabilitated man. Let's give him his
Yeah. Yeah.
dues." Um, and then it all goes tits up, as it were. Um, it all goes wrong. Is that what's missing? Is the fact that actually this guy is just someone random off the street who they've invited in a manipulative way,
Mm.
in so much as but then again
I
in the
think it
doc.
comes back to the point you've already made, though. It comes
Mm,
back to the point that if the Joker's kills are performative,
mm,
and primarily motivated by that performative aspect of the
Mm,
character,
mm,
then doing that public thing from that perspective fits.
mm.
Now,
Because it is kind of like a ta-da, kind of just like a look
yeah,
what I did.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
But we've already seen from this character, from this version of the Joker, his murders are grudge based.
yeah.
Every kill he makes is justifiable, which I think is part of the inherent problem of the characterization to
Mm.
me.
So it's a personal affront, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. There's a
That he's.
personalized
Mm,
aspect to it.
mm,
And that's the case with the first guy he kills, it's the case with the guy he kills in his apartment, and it's the
mm,
case with Bobby De Niro's character. It's personal.
yeah.
He's been affronted.
Mm,
To make the jump from that to, I'm the crazy Joker and I'm going to kill my therapist in the asylum,
mm.
to
And
me
then
was
have that
too big a jump.
Looney Tunes ending as well,
Yeah, it
essentially.
wasn't earned.
No.
That was the issue for me. That ending wasn't earned by the narrative I'd just seen. The character he became wasn't justified by the journey I saw.
Mm,
I've
mm.
had discussions with people, nigh
Uh,
on arguments, differences of opinion with people about this.
mm.
To me, that ending doesn't fit what I saw happening in the movie at all. It was written backwards.
Well, unless you really make a leap of logic and say that in the police car when the car is hit, he he just slips into, there's nothing of Arthur left. He's just become this other thing. But the thing is, everything he's been doing has been rooted
Yeah,
in Arthur's grudges and Arthur's desire to be a comedian. It's
yeah,
not. It's not. It's this isn't quite the same as the one bad day
yeah.
um, scenario.
Yeah, and I mean there is an aspect of falling down. There's Fight Club in there. There's Falling Down. There's American Psycho. There's
Yeah,
obviously King of Comedy, which it references a huge amount knowingly.
yeah.
Um, was it as effective as any of those single portrayals?
No.
I mean, his performance was. I felt at times it was self-indulgent, but then a lot of actors are self-indulgent, so that's kind of their job. Uh, but I mean, yeah, I don't want to take anything away from the guy. He won an
No.
Oscar. That doesn't necessarily mean anything in this day and age, but he won an Oscar. He obviously put his heart and soul into it. And as a human being, I think he very much believes something,
Mm,
at least,
mm.
whatever it is, he believes something. And
I suppose just two thoughts just to wrap up our Joker segments. Look at
yeah,
again, given our challenge.
yeah,
Um, One of them would be the triumphant moment, with the blood
yeah,
and the crowd. I
yeah.
suppose, as you say, there's a disconnect between that scene and then him being in an institution in the next moment. Into which, how the heck without bringing in the army, do you turn
Mm,
that around?
yeah.
Because that's a huge crowd. That's more than just a riot. That looked like the whole of the city had just come out to start messing up the place. Um, so there's a question there which isn't really answered. But then I suppose the other thing as well is that, outside of the film, do you think actually that the Joker is uh, because obviously we've talked about the Joker before, and we've talked about why he's interesting and different people who've played him and so on, so who we think has played him well and why.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that actually that he's as a character far too? I'm not really sure how to phrase this. So I'm just going to say it's too easy an access point to faux insights into mental illness, the ills of society, and anarchy. That means that actually, for, to put it another way, is the Joker far too easy a shortcut to getting an Oscar? If you see what I mean,
Mm,
because people can go, "Oh, look, that this person's being completely and uh, countercultural," I suppose you could say.
mm.
Give them an Oscar. Look how far they went down, and you know uh, doing things like mailing dead rats to people, and you used
Used Johnnies and
yeah
stuff like that. Oh,
uh,
the
yeah
Jared Leto method approach.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It feels as though for some people, and for the broader, in the same way that geek has become chic,
Mm,
for these publications who will make it to trap references and whatever, just to look as though they've always been invested in this stuff. Is the Joker now just a shorthand for edgy alternative, and it's far too easy just to essentially, as you said in this film, or about this film. to just do things for shock value now.
Mm,
Has he become the pop art, as it were, of the 20s, of
yeah,
the 2020s? Uh,
yeah.
what do you think?
I think that's a really valid observation, actually. At the risk of sounding like one of the History Today kind of memes that we see out there, I think it's if you're going to make something that's a critique on society,
Hmm.
I I think maybe using it felt at many points it felt cheap and manipulative and
Mhm.
exploitative. That was my problem with it,
Mhm.
and I can't. No matter the justification of like, oh, this guy's been crushed by, yeah, okay, of course, yeah, and so were the characters in Falling Down. So
Mm.
so were characters in many films that we've seen that
Well, and
were
also,
also manipulative, but
coming back to this notion of a Gotham movie, and
mm,
so too are at this moment in time in the film
mm,
every other citizen who isn't earning a lot of money in
mm,
Gotham. What in that sense, what gives this man the right to do what he did? And it doesn't seem as though they adequately answer that. Aside from him having some revelations about his past,
yeah,
which to many people, because to put it another way, I suppose if I was someone who was adopted, you know. Um, I'd be very upset about this. But then again, frankly, adoption has always been a shorthand for this person has a murky past and potentially this is going to lead to bad stuff in the future. So I
mm,
suppose I think this is interesting. This is why I wanted to have this conversation. Is that
yeah.
you've talked me down from going that was much better than I thought it would be, um, which I still think it probably was much better than I thought it would be.
It was
But
still a better film than I expected it to
yeah,
be.
but it wasn't. It's not. I guess in that sense, it's not the Joker.
Yeah.
It's a
And
man.
well,
It's a
that was
man
my
who went
conclusion
off a
as
cliff.
well. It's
Yeah.
it's not, as far as I'm concerned, it's not the Joker. And I think what would have made it work much better as a film for me
Hmm.
is if there had been a Batman comic on view in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, Adding that
Oh, I
layer of
see.
meta to
Yes.
it,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, for me would have made it make more sense
So actually,
in other ways.
this is an alternative New York where they have Batman
Yeah,
in the psyche. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. But then again, as soon as you did that, though, people would be accusing you of validating people who turn up at theaters going, "I'm the Joker," and shoot people. That kind of
well,
nonsense.
isn't that true? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Mm,
doesn't it lead into that somewhere?
mm,
There's definitely an argument in
mm,
that somewhere.
mm,
um,
mm. Right. Keeping in line with our challenge. What the new Batman movie is coming out, The Batman, at some point in the
yeah,
future. It
yeah.
looks interesting. At some
Yeah.
point, maybe we could talk about that in more detail. But there's this news that Robert Pattinson has given up on his workout regime during the
He's not
lockdown.
even. He's just refused to do it.
Yeah,
Apparently,
yeah.
just refusing to do it.
And what do you think of that?
So, very long story short, as a kid reading superhero comic books and Batman comic books and wanting to grow up to be like Batman,
Hmm.
working out was something I started very young. I remember the first time I did sit-ups. I think I did about 60 of them, and I think I was probably about 10.
Uh-huh.
Um, and all throughout my teens, I went to the gym. I would work out with friends. Um, I'm quite naturally compact, so putting on oodles of muscle is quite difficult. But I've always worked out, and a large part of that is because of the self-conception that was placed in my head about what masculinity was by comic
Hmm.
books. Now, I don't want to get into a whole thing about that because I don't necessarily think there's uh, a clean right or wrong
No.
on this. I think what you make of masculinity, femininity, etc., is a subjective thing, and we need to allow space for that and not criticize people who decide that their version of that is more traditional or
Hmm.
isn't more traditional. It's like, well, that if it's anything goes, then it's anything goes.
Well, for example, I have friends who say work out, as if, and other
Mm,
people who think that if you're not looking after your body, then you're fundamentally spiritually flawed as a human being.
mm,
So there are extremes in terms of how one cares for oneself and
yeah,
how that attaches to their concepts of their their physical being, whether they're male or
Yeah.
female, actually is quite varied. But yeah, so allowing for that, yeah,
Allowing for
yeah,
perception being subjective, which it
yeah,
is for
yeah,
every single human being in the world. So,
yeah.
allowing
Yes.
for perception to be subjective. Now, um, I think it's really interesting from a mental health perspective, since it does tie into where we were,
Hmm.
that the notion of steroid use and substance use to increase physical musculature and the depiction of these essentially gods who came out in the wake of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno, who overtook the public image of what a man was. If you
Hmm.
look at the idea of what a man is in the 70s or the 60s, Hercules is a dude with a big beard and a bit of a hairy chest and a gut and no discernible musculature other than that. He's just manly because he
Mm.
obviously has some testosterone because he has hair, you know. And then the further forward you go in time through to where there's chemical intervention in training
Hmm.
and sports science becomes a thing, then you've got, and don't get me wrong, I love the Schwarzeneggers, particularly Schwarzenegger and the Stallones of the world. Um, but that changed how we pictured ourselves as men
Mm.
en masse.
Hmm.
And it became a requirement.
Mm.
And it became a requirement, unfortunately, because of one of my favorite actors in one of my favorite roles of all time, and that's Hugh Jackman playing Wolverine.
Yeah.
He took it to, he's such a dedicated actor, he's
Hmm.
such a hard worker. He took it to such a limit that anyone who followed in those shoes had to not just work out, but really look the part.
Yeah.
And I think it's escalated from Jackman to Christian Bale in Batman with his extreme body transformations, all of which I followed very closely,
Hmm. Hmm.
to the Marvel Universe, where it's suddenly, if you're not jacked and steroid jacked,
Hmm. Hmm.
then, and I will wrap this up in a second,
No,
sorry,
it's
but
fine.
if
It's
you're
fine.
not jacked and steroid jacked, then you're not able, in the public eye, to properly embody this character. Now, anecdotally, I know a number of actors who have used either testosterone, growth hormone, some kind of steroid, or performance enhancer to get their bodies because they don't have the time
Well, and
to
also,
live in the
crucially,
gym.
they're not athletes. They're not going to have someone checking
Exactly.
on them in a lab or something.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not the standards there. No.
Don't necessarily have the raw genetic material to look like Schwarzenegger
Mm.
without some kind of help.
Hmm.
So it's very common, disturbingly common. And I always find it funny now when I look at these celebrity workouts because it's like, well, unless you're taking testosterone or human growth hormone, it's not going to do that for you.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
that's a problem.
Well, I remember when the 300 came out. There was an awful
Hmm.
lot there about the
Yep.
Spartan workout.
Yeah.
That was one of
Yeah.
the beginnings of the lifting the tractor tires and doing the ropes and all that kind of
That's
thing.
right. Yeah. People
Um,
were throwing up in my gym. They weren't working hard
yeah,
enough.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I agree in so much as I think there's a I suppose so it's now almost part of the press junket, isn't it, for these films,
Yeah.
to hear how hard it was,
That's right.
and the fact that the reason uh, that Wolverine is such a role to fear in that sense is because Hugh Jackman's talking about how he would fast on water in the build up to a
16-8.
scene.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
get to a point where essentially he's more or less killing himself biologically just to look good in that
Mm,
one scene.
mm,
Um, and the fact that that's become, and the only word for it is fetishized,
yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
become an accepted part of the regime, um, is certainly problematic, and I guess it's problematic in a similar way to which, uh, in a less extreme way, in I'm kind of fed up of watching DVD extras now because more often than not, DVD extras will emphasize it was so cold. It was so cold when we were filming, and we worked so hard on this.
Like the suffering is a right. That's
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, and as though actually suffering has to be part of of entertainment. I find
Mm.
that very interesting, very problematic. Um, and so actually, I kind of the problem. I suppose the question is though, in terms of uh, Pattinson, as you were saying earlier, in terms of Pattinson, um, is he trying to make the point that actually, so long as Batman can do the martial arts that he's trained in doing, um, and have a body that reflects that, that is enough. Because also, because he was talking, I've seen a quote something like, "No men look like that in the '70s,"
Hmm.
and I don't think this film is meant to be set in the '70s, but as far as I can
Hmm.
tell. But I suppose what
No.
he's saying is you're asking me to do stuff that previously you would not ask people to do,
Yeah.
or do you think he's actually, in so much as do you think it's sorry, do you think it is either this character driven thing of this isn't necessary, or do you think it's actually more of a broader sort of a protest against what Hollywood is doing to people, doing to human beings in their care, broadly speaking?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I don't think it's certainly possible that it's both, but that I sensed an element of protest in that, in the sense that the words, if you're doing that, you're part of the problem,
Yeah.
were
Mm,
quoted. Now, I don't want to extrapolate too much on that, but speculatively, I think part of the problem is this kind of steroidal mass of unhealthy, and it is unhealthy. That's the problem.
mm,
It's not good for you,
mm,
and it's not good for. If you look at how, and I would be fascinated to see some papers on this, but like steroid use now, from what I hear anecdotally, is far more widespread in
mm,
the days of that we live in, of social media and Instagram and body image. And you've got these kind of 18, 19-year-old kids taking steroids so that they can be Instagram superstars.
mm,
um, that's only going to feed into the idea that kids looking at that, or young men looking at that, are going to go, wow, I feel
mm.
super inadequate. I don't know. It's like the whole size zero thing. I think if anything, we're now experiencing that, um, in Hollywood, with Hollywood males. It just hasn't been recognised as what it is yet.
Mm. Well,
But
I suppose size zero. I guess an equivalent for males would be the that Action Man weird thing of right at the waist, these two
hmm.
lines forming, yeah,
Hmm.
down, and
Hmm.
essentially it's also similar to size zero into its intimate so much as in the male perspective, it's guiding the eye towards the focus of masculinity, shall we say?
Towards party time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but and the thing is, it looks like people like Ryan Reynolds have always seemingly had that, and he's lucky enough to have a body that can just be like that. It looks as though he does work hard, but he's. It looks as though it's just part of him and part of his lifestyle, and he doesn't seem
Mm.
to be necessarily part of the problem because in so much as he doesn't do. Yeah, anyway, the point is though he that kind of body is, as you say, genetically possible for some people
Yeah.
relatively easily. For
Yeah.
other people,
Absolutely.
it's not. It shouldn't be necessarily part of the contract. But
Mm.
I guess. But then again, the other quote that I've seen is that Pattinson saying that in his role in Twilight, he had to take his shirt off for one role, and they said put it back on
Put it back on. Yeah.
because he was so pale and ill-defined. And I'm like, I could understand that. I can and so, but did you? I guess just a final point again. Keep trying to keep to our challenge. Do you think that actually that there's scope for saying actually that we need more? We need to see more realistic bodies uh, in entertainment, such that to the point such that actually actors are clearly able to make a choice about how they're portraying a role. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's just about keeping it balanced and healthy, isn't it?
Mm,
I never expected to find myself on this side of that kind of argument, and
mm,
and you know, just so I'm not called out as a hypocrite, because I'm about to go and work out after this.
hmm
Uh, but
Get
it's
hench.
get a hench, get a hench. But the point is, like, that's my idea. That's what I want to do. Like, that's
Uh-huh.
my idea of fun now. I
Uh-huh.
enjoy working out, and I don't take steroids, obviously, and I just enjoy the process of it,
hmm
and it makes me feel stronger, and it makes me feel safer in a way. But that's
Mm,
just part of my head makeup.
mm,
Now, I don't feel like everyone should have to do that. I don't feel like if you're not doing that, there's anything flawed. You know, that's, I think, part of the narrative that we just need to question. Like,
Mm,
think about all your favorite Batmans,
mm,
yeah, for a second. With me, I know at least two of them didn't work out
mm-hmm,
one bit. Keaton and Adam West.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
You know,
mm-hmm.
like Keaton, can you see Keaton in the gym lifting 250 kilos? Like, it's not going to happen.
No.
And yet, his performance wasn't. So that's where I'd first point when I'd
Mm-hmm,
say, you know, if people are going to write this off,
mm-hmm,
um, just because he's saying he doesn't want to take steroids and go to the gym, essentially, then I think that's a bad call,
mm-hmm.
because you don't need to do that to play Batman. That's already been proven.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that I don't feel like this should be a backlash to say that you can't do that,
Mm-hmm,
because I don't feel it's anyone's place to say what the ideal is. If your ideal is that you want to go and do that, more power to you. Fine.
mm-hmm.
You know, it's a free world in theory, at least, not in practice. But 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 equally, yeah, I like, I do actually. I didn't think I'd be here, but no, I understand what he's saying. I actually support what he's saying. I think we need more healthy. Healthy, no, is a loaded term. Perhaps just more realistic and everyday depictions of masculinity that don't rely on a steroidal or hormone treated washboard six pack that isn't achievable without fasting 16 hours a day, living on nothing but boiled tuna and broccoli, which is horribly micronutrient deprived, by the way. Don't do that to yourself. Um, yeah,
Okay.
I'll stop
Well,
rambling now.
no,
Sorry.
it's fine. I think again, in the spirit of trying to stick somewhat to our challenge, we have recorded for
Mm,
47 minutes though.
there
Um,
we go.
yeah, I suppose
I'm
I
done.
would.
I'm done. I'm good.
Yeah, done. Mic drop. I suppose I would say on that note, in that sense, what I'm about to do is have a sandwich and then make a bookshelf in the shed.
Cool.
You know, and that's
Carpentry is masculine, man,
yeah, exactly.
and feminine. If you want to go there, like,
Yeah.
I'm not. I have no prejudgments about this. Do what you want,
No,
male
but
or female.
it's interesting though, isn't it? It's interesting how, yeah, how for some people that would be seen as not. Well, I guess one final point, that one very final point would be to say that actually I probably always linked Batman's physique with an aspect of his discipline.
Hmm.
You see what I mean? And so
Hmm.
that's probably one of the reasons why when I saw what Christian Bale did to himself in terms of getting bigger than he needed to get, I kind of thought, well, actually, I can see why he's doing that because as far as he's concerned, Bruce Wayne is a super disciplined person,
Mm.
um, which I don't necessarily always consider myself to be. I'm very disciplined when it comes to work. I'm not very disciplined when it comes to exercise. And I'd like to be more so. So I suppose
Mm.
there is room to come towards Batman from a perspective of he's an icon of discipline, which is what I try to do. But yeah, I guess it's when you take it to the point where he's an icon of body sculpting. That's
Mm.
different. That's different to discipline, isn't it?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And you only have to look at Denny O'Neil's Venom storyline, from the Venom being the drug that Bane uses rather than the symbiote from the other
Mm,
studio,
mhm,
um, to see them actually tackle that
mm,
notion. Batman isn't strong enough to save a child, and
mm.
deeply internalizes and personalizes that, and starts taking steroids to get stronger, and loses his mind
Yeah.
basically, because he's just becomes this hyper aggressive, hyper, you
Mm,
know, tense person.
mm,
Um, in a way, that's a good narrative kind of depiction of the way that those images, it ties into 90s comics and how every dude looked like they had a million veins in their
mm.
face. You know, it was off the back of drawing
Yeah.
based on, or in some artists' cases, um, bodybuilders.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's not what people look like. Even really disciplined martial artists. Look at Bruce Lee. Look at fighters. Look at most boxers.
Mm.
They don't look like what we put on the screen.
No. Yeah. Okay.
Something to think about.
Yeah. Thank you very much for turning up today, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And we failed more or less, I think, at our challenge, but we did our
Yes, we did.
best. We did our best.
We tried. We tried, but we failed. It's okay. There's a lesson in failure.
There is a lesson. There is a lesson. Discipline, discipline.
Yeah,
Um,
I think tackling one thing at a time maybe is more our speed.
yeah. Thank you guys for watching at home. As ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.